A portion of this video is sponsored by Squarespace. They're disruptive, they're aggressive, and their cameras sometimes make the sun turn black. We are of course talking about Blackmagic Design, the company behind the industry standard color correction software DaVinci Resolve, and a bunch of crazy cameras like the Ursa Mini, the 4K Pocket, and this thing. I'm Erik Beck, and today we are diving deep into the world of Blackmagic cinema cameras. The early days. Blackmagic Design is an Australian company and was founded back in 2001 by engineer Grant Petty. Their mission? To fix the flawed and overpriced TV and film industry and hand power back to the creative people driving it. So in 2002, they released their very first product, a video capture card for Mac OS called DeckLink. This card was first to offer 10-bit hold on. Oh, I'm getting a video call from Caden, our resident Gen Z filmmaker. Hey, what's up, Caden? Hey, Mr. Erik, what's a capture card? Well, Caden, great question. Back in the day, cameras recorded the tapes, and in order to get the footage onto your computer for editing, you had to use your camera or a special capture card to digitize or capture the footage. What's a tape? It's like a really old SD card. Yo, that's weird. I'm sure there's like a kids react video explaining it. What's that? Is that like a TikTok channel? Just Google it, Caden! Gross. Enter DaVinci. After releasing a few more successful capture cards, Blackmagic took a big step in 2004 when they opened a fancy post-production studio in Singapore. This digital intermediate facility was one of the most advanced in all of Asia, with 4K, DPX, and 3D capabilities, which back then was a really big deal. Why is this digital facility you've never heard of so important? Well, around the same time, a little company called DaVinci Systems released their newest color correction software, DaVinci Resolve, which you probably have heard of. Like most big budget post houses, Blackmagic's new facility used Resolve, but quickly discovered some big technical limitations. Also bear in mind that back then, the only way to get your hands on DaVinci Resolve was to buy their proprietary hardware that cost between $200 and $800,000. Next time you think we're not indie enough, you think about that, buddy. Bucko, Brewski. So in 2009, when DaVinci Systems was not doing so good financially, Blackmagic swoops in, acquires Resolve, and in less than a year, releases a Mac OS version for less than $1,000. Up to this point, Blackmagic was mostly known only to professional studios, but with this absolute baller move of making Resolve available to like normal people, Blackmagic took their first step towards winning over indie filmmakers. Speaking of winning over indie filmmakers, let me tell you about Squarespace. They have awesome award-winning templates that let you just click, drag, and drop. Before you know it, you're already halfway towards a beautiful website for your brand. Squarespace also lets you embed custom video blocks and image overlays to really spruce up your portfolio if you're an aspiring filmmaker. And thanks to its social media integration, you can even auto-post your content to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, truly making it an all-in-one platform. If you're ready to start putting you and your work out there for all to see, check out the description and click the link for 10% off a website or domain. It's camera time. At 2012's NAB, they announced their very first camera with the super creative name, Blackmagic Cinema Camera. This bad boy came with an EF lens mount and impressive specs like 13 stops of dynamic range, a 2.5K sensor, a built-in SSD recorder, and super dope codecs like Cinema DNG, 12-bit RAW, and Apple ProRes, all for just 2,995 buckaroos.
What?
Ah! People had been begging the big camera companies like Canon, Sony, and Panasonic to bring out features like these in their consumer price cameras, but they were like, nah, we good. So when this little software and post-production hardware company came out of nowhere and dropped the stats on the BMCC, people couldn't wait to get their hands on it. And lucky for them, Blackmagic was ready to deliver. No, that's a lie. But thankfully, when the camera did finally arrive, it was flawless, everybody loved it, and nobody had any complaints. Now that's also a lie. In reality, the camera had a lot of issues and weird quirks. Really, to make the camera usable in any practical sense, you had to buy a lot of accessories, and while the large touchscreen was nice, it was a fingerprint magnet and very hard to use in daylight. Despite all these quirks, many filmmakers still saw it as an amazing deal, especially considering its epic image quality. The raw video it produced blew away all video DSLRs at the time, and the camera could really compete with much more expensive cameras. It's 4K and pocket time. Just a year later, Blackmagic announced two new cameras, the 4K cinema camera and the pocket cinema camera. The new version of the cinema camera basically looked the same as the old one, but added 4K internal recording, an optional PL mount, and a global Super 35 sensor for just the low price
of $3,995.
4K for under 4K. Did they use that in the marketing? Because if they didn't, they missed out. But that buttery image came at a cost. The BMCC 4K was a data-hungry oinkster. But wait, there's more. Enter the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera, or the BMPCC. This camera was kind of like a smaller, lighter version of the original camera. They both had a Super 16 sensor, PRS, and raw recording internally, and an impressive 13 stops of dynamic range. And it only cost $999. What? Less than $1,000. But as with the original, there were some issues. First off, the battery life was hot garbage, and the internal audio was pretty unusable. Also, there was the annoying auto iris feature, which would stop down your lens to like f/22 every time you turn on the camera. Despite all these quirks, Blackmagic continued to win over filmmakers because at the end of the day, the image quality looked f***ing great. Next up, the Ursa. Fast forward to 2014 when Blackmagic makes another leap forward with the release of the Ursa. While their first batch of cameras were aimed more at indie filmmakers who would maybe use a DSLR, the Ursa was Blackmagic's first camera to take on the professional market. The Ursa had the same great dynamic range and image quality people had come to expect from Blackmagic, but they also added 80 FPS at 4K, a user upgradable sensor block, which they never actually released sensors for, and all the buttons and displays and connections you'll ever want or expect from a professional camera. Probably too many buttons. If anything, some people thought they went a bit overboard. The flip out screen was like a huge iPad stuck to the side of the camera, and the audio level meters were bigger than an 80s boombox. Blackmagic's solution, the Ursa Mini. This bad boy came out just a year later and came with pretty much all the key components and features as the bigger Ursa, but in a smaller, lighter package. Weight problem? Solved. Cha-ching! I don't know why I made that sound effect. 2016 was not just about the Ursa Mini though. Blackmagic also released the
micro cinema camera,
which was kind of like their answer to the GoPro. The coolest thing about it was that it was basically a miniaturized pocket cinema camera, but with a global shutter, which is dope. The only annoying thing was that you couldn't eat it, and it had no screen. In 2017, Blackmagic released another Ursa camera,
the Ursa Mini Pro 4.6K,
or the UMP 4.6K. Built around the same third generation sensor tech from the Ursa Mini, the Pro primarily focused on ergonomic refinements like internal ND filters, shoulder accessible controls, and an additional 4-inch touchscreen. Maybe the coolest addition though was a user interchangeable lens mount. In the past, you had to buy either an EF or PL mount version of the camera, but the new Pro allowed owners to switch between EF, PL, or B4 mounts all by themselves. All these features and upgrades made the Ursa Mini Pro one of the most affordable and flexible camera platforms around. But what about that slow-mo though? Enter the brand new 2019 Ursa Mini Pro 4.6K G2 for Generation 2. I'm guessing. This camera has completely redesigned electronics, including a new sensor with vastly improved image processing speeds. What the hell does that mean?
What are magnets?
Well, the G2 can shoot 4.6K footage at 60 frames per second, 4K at 150 frames per second, or 1080p at 300 frames per second. Slow motion Neo. I don't know. It's 4K pocket time. 2018, our pocket prayers were answered with the release of the Blackmagic 4K pocket camera, which does not fit in your pocket at all, unless you're wearing JNCOs. We're gonna give it a pass though because this camera has some super dope specs. Active micro 4/3 mount, 4K 10-bit ProRes or 12-bit RAW, 120 FPS, internal recording to CFast cards or SD cards, or external recording directly to a hard drive via USB-C. Even though this camera feels more like an upgraded version of the original cinema camera line versus the Pocket,
Who cares?
it makes a gorgeous image and only costs $1,295, which is crazy low for the specs you are getting. Sure, it's still a bit of a weird shape, but it's a lot better than this. The battery life is pretty crappy, but the Canon batteries it uses are fairly cheap, and you can even use affordable 12-volt batteries via an adapter cable, or pick up one of Blackmagic's fancy new battery grips if you got some money to burn. And that pretty much brings us up to today. So even if you are a die-hard Sony, Canon, or Panasonic fan, you gotta ask yourself, is your GH5 or C200 a little better or a little cheaper thanks to Blackmagic? All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Let us know what filmmaking topics you'd like us to take a deep dive into next. Could be gear related like this one, or maybe more of a film history angle? Let us know in the comments and hit that subscribe button to make sure you never miss an episode. I'm Erik Beck, and I'll see you next time. Yo, my name is Caden. I'm a writer, director, claymation sculptor. I live with my parents. I just wanted to see if maybe you could like check out my channel. It's like mostly vlogging, but I also do cooking and gaming.